You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, January 16th, 2025, 7:36 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I thought that one of the things that comes up a lot in the attachment work and that I might touch on is how does attachment security or insecurity affect the work environment, and in particular, the leadership environment of work. We all, or most of us, have spent some time working for a boss or a team leader. I spent most of my life doing that. I haven't. I'm the boss now over here. Um, what is exactly a boss supposed to do, and how would attachment security affect that? I think is an interesting question. And I know that there's a lot of attention in the tech world and in the startup world around startup teams and what is the attachment strategy of a startup team and how does that affect it? And all sorts of shorthands for the VCs to see which group they might invest in and which group they might not invest in based on attachment consideration. Most of the time in the startup world, of course, because most of the ventures don't pan out, there isn't a lot of interest in changing the dynamic of a particular team, but maybe in recognizing what team would be the best to go for. And what I tend to notice in looking at it from the attachment perspective through just as a sort of observation of the people I tend to work with is that the very top of the leadership structure, people tend to be more on the dismissing side of things, and then everybody else tends to be on the preoccupied side. So what you have is that typical dynamic of the dismissing person in charge and the preoccupied person taking care of the demands of their exploration. And in particular, one of the things that comes up quite a bit in my work is the passive preoccupied person. Lucy, my dog, and I are having a battle because it's cold out and I want to keep the door closed, but she wants to come and go. So we'll see how that works out. um, Passively preoccupied people, for all intents and purposes, appear to be dismissing, but they're actually not. And mainly that has to do with the quality of exploration. If the top part of the team is controlling where the exploration goes, and you need more people than the top people, more to do. If there's more to do than the top people can manage to do on their own, then they have to have the people that support that. And it would be better in some ways if the people who follow are purely in the support position and not in a position to reorient the exploration. I think we used to call that the Peter principle. Everybody's promoted one station above their ability. Uh, and so everybody's slightly out of their depth in the position that they hold, whereas in the subordinate position, they did quite a bit better. Um, so just, doing a quick AI search of what a leadership position is. It's the ability to make decisions. It's a sense of integrity. I thought that was actually kind of humorous given the state of things, that integrity was actually one of the qualities that was being considered for leadership, since in our country, we don't really care at all about that. Uh, empathy to actually be able to understand somebody else's motivation. Empathy we talk about in these levels of the visceral experience of somebody else's uh, emotional or physical pain, the ability to read facial expressions and body language and assign and a meaning to the facial expressions and body language. Um, the third, of course, is what we call in Buddhism compassion and empathy, where you feel in your body a facsimile of the feeling states of the other person. And in a normal or ordinary empathetic experience, we use the second and third one to compare. If the external presentation matches the felt sense of the person, we tend to believe them. And if they don't match, we tend not to believe them. And then the fourth one is, do they do what they say they're going to do? And do they not do what they say they're not going to do? That's another one of the things that we don't really consider so much in our leadership question. It seems that those kinds of requirements have been dispensed with. But when you put that empathetic package together, people say that they're going to do something, they say they're not going to do something, and you can tell whether they're doing it or not doing it because they're not good at manipulating you. Of course, if you can generate an internal feeling state through thinking that matches your external presentation, then you're a good manipulator. That's what we would call that. And if you can't do that, then people can tell whether you're lying or not. I think in the culture we live in, then it's often hard to know whether somebody is telling the truth or not. And in a leadership position, in a secure dynamic, of course, that would be something that was required, and that there wouldn't be much opportunity really for a violation of that kind of trust. Epistemic trust is what we call it, that you believe somebody is telling you the truth and you believe what they're telling you is meant to be helpful to you. And in a professional position where you're in service of whatever agreements that you've made for the employment, to know what is really happening and to be able to reach out for the support that you need so that you can provide the service that you're contracted for, makes it much easier and less stressful. Whereas when the leadership is not being straightforward, it undermines the sense of confidence that you have. Often limiting the willingness you have to put a lot of energy into what you're supposed to be doing. Communication is another one. Are you able to communicate what it is that you need? And are you able to ensure that people understand what you mean? I like to talk about that in a mentalizing or metacognition way. You understand the reality that you've made, or the meaning that you've assigned to what's happening. You understand what about that meaning that you need to communicate, and you're able to present your communication to the person that you're communicating to in a way that they understand what you mean. And the way that you validate that is to inquire as to the intention in your meeting is actually what's received, and then you take in their response and understand that, and modify your understanding of what's actually happening, and so that you're able to coordinate the effort toward what it is that you want to get done. Resilience, of course, one of the things about exploration is that most of the time exploration doesn't pan out. And if you're good at exploring, this is just simply something that's built into the understanding of it. You make a foray into one direction of understanding. If it doesn't work, you make a foray into another direction of understanding. Of course, in business, what we would say is you make a business plan, right? and then you actually do the business plan, and then you see what happens. And if what you thought was going to happen, if your projections aren't the thing that happens, but something else happens, then you adapt, you modify that. There's a famous study of the difference between Macy's and I think Gimbel's in New York, that when the that sort of convenience drive came in toward the end of the 50s, and electricity was cheap and widely available, all sorts of electronic appliances came out. And Macy's recognized, I may not remember this exactly right, but one of the stores recognized immediately that there was a huge uptick in the sale of these gadgets, like uh, electric kettles and pans and rotisseries and all sorts of things that started to sell vacuums. And so they created a department to sell these kinds of things. And another store thought that this was a fad, and so they didn't take on the development of that kind of availability and marketing, and got killed in the marketplace because of it. So you really are in this position of doing the plan, and doing the plan as well as you can, and then seeing what happens, and then modifying the plan uh, in order to adapt. And if we use Mettagroup as an example, the early idea for Mettagroup was to do a live guided meditation in the morning. And the whole business plan was built around the live guided meditation at 7:30 in the morning. And we did that. And I also taught classes around the traditional Buddhist teaching, and then I had a little bit of emphasis on talking about attachment in some classes. And the attachment classes took off, and the Dharma classes did not, and the morning meditation never took off. And so the whole original business plan that was built around the live guided meditation, if we had insisted that be the path, that we would have long ago been getting by on a barista's salary. Every 6 months redoing the business plan, which reflects what's actually happening, and how to organize around that, and not actually what you had wanted to have happen. The thing about our society in the moment is everybody talks wildly about scaling. Everything has to be scalable. And the only one of the things that I ever did that was scalable was the guided meditation in the morning. All the other classes have a built-in limit to the time and energy that I have. And that's one of the reasons why soon you won't be able to talk to the taxi driver, because there won't be one. Self-awareness is another. It's nice to be in conversation and dialogue and in work relationships with people who have some capacity for self-awareness, because they understand the definitions of what's happening a little bit better. But, we are, each of us, making in every moment reality that's based on our meaning deck, not on what's actually happening, right? And so that when you're in an environment where people are experiencing the same thing, even though they are experiencing the same thing, what they're really doing is creating a meaning based on their deck. And so everybody's operating in these personalized meaning states. And if you have somebody who has some awareness of what that is, because they have an openness within themselves, it makes it easier to negotiate with them. It makes it easier to come into settlements with them, and people who are who have blinded themselves to themselves, it's much harder to do that because they don't really understand uh, the meta dialogue aspect of what's going on. Humility, um, an interesting thing. There's the hierarchical aspect of it. I'm better than you, the expert, subordinate, superior, inferior dynamic of that. There's an understanding of power, usually in work related relationships, there's a power dynamic that's built into the structure of it. Can you separate the power that's associated with your position in the company from who you are? That would be a nice thing. And do you understand that if you're playing on a team, that it's actually the team effort that carries the ball over the line, to use a sports metaphor, and not the glomming of credit or the dispersing of blame, which I often find problematic. Can we all pull together and make it work? And can you be persuasive in organizing the team so that it actually functions well as a group? And then the flexibility, I talked a little bit about that before, you really do have to do what's happening, make a brilliant plan, and then do what's happening rather than make a brilliant plan and then attempt to conform reality around the plan. Over and over again, that leads to failure. Christian?
Or this may be a big question and a bit of a hand grenade. If, and stop me if you don't like any of my premises, but if most jobs kind of suck, uh, at this point, um, then I wonder if like the attachment framework and the working world are kind of at cross purposes, where like I think of attachment as like, how do I relate to people that I care about, that I really want to be in relation with, whereas I think of like coworkers as maybe once in a while I like someone, but mostly I would like a polite distance from all aspects of like work, and if I
And
ever,
you don't think that's attachment related?
I mean, perhaps, but also maybe it's rare that you could find a job that would have a, or maybe it's not, but maybe it's rare that you could find a job that would have um the constellation of opportunity where it would make sense to see through an attachment framework. So I wonder if like if I look at a job posting and they say we're like a family, I think that is definitely not a place that I want to work for. So I anyway, that's my grenade, but I just kind of wonder how like if looking at things through an attachment lens has a natural end, or maybe like collaboration, like is the business world not inherently um like about trading, about transactions, right? And
Yeah,
does
yeah.
that limit the sort of attachment, like should we keep it transactional? And that's kind of a polite distance that we can offer ourselves.
So I find it an interesting question. The business world is largely transactional. You agree to do something for a company or an entity, but it also exists in a relational way, unless you are uh, strictly interacting with the machine. Um, but it really is, from the personal side of it, the balance between primary and secondary exploration. Most of us are in a situation where we need to provide resources to support our primary exploration, and we have to gather the resources from somewhere. When we look at the culture that we live in, which is culture, I would talk as the larger container, and the individual societies that fit together like the pieces of a puzzle that create the spectrum of culture that we have. The culture itself and the societies that we live in the subcultural societies that we live in, all have their own valuation of what's important and what isn't important. Most of the time, they're extrinsic in the sense that we're social animals, and we are very sensitive to the perception of social hierarchy. And so a lot of what culturally is relevant are the markers for social status. And this is particularly true, I think, in a lot of work hierarchies, mainly through money, and what money can offer in terms of stuff, which then is translated into that the markers of hierarchy of your position in society. But most of the time, they don't relate directly to what primary meaning is. And so the balance between secondary and primary exploration is the gathering of time, energy, and resources so that you can pursue the primary exploration. And one of the constraints of the business world is that there's very little consideration of that in the people that are employed there. The mission of the business is more important than the welfare of the people that work there, even though there's a lot of tap dancing around that. The 5-day work week in this country is not that solid, whereas in other places in the Western world, Europe, for instance, it's more ingrained, and there is more of a life-work balance, and there's more of a compression in terms of the distribution of resources in the business world, which we don't have here at all. But still, the disparity between say, the upper 1% or the upper 100th of a percent and everybody else is stunning, really, in terms of that. And one of the things that happens when the inequality gets to the point of imbalance that it is that there's enough money to corrupt the governments. And so you find that the level of corruption is also astonishing. The just blatant corruption of the government is just astonishing in comparison to previous times. And this in this country, of course, in the last 50 years or so, as you may or may not recall, the upper 10% of society had 70% of the assets when Carter was president, and now they have close to 90% of the assets. This is a shift of $60 trillion out of poor people, out of working people, out of the middle class. And this has all been engineered through the tax code. So essentially in our country, in the US, poor people pay for the operation of the government, and the upper 10% don't. And yet they reap the primary benefit of all of that expense. And, the richest person in the world is now worth more than $400 billion, which is not taxed. So, and that's really when I talk about corruption, I mean about the relentless changing of the tax code, so the burden has fallen on poor people to pay for the operation of the government, which then generates this huge windfall that is then used to further corrupt the government. It's a spiral which we're in, which you may be reflected in the current nominees for the cabinet of the next administration. we in Los Angeles, of course, are taking great solace in the fires, in the words of our president-elect, drill, baby, drill. And the complete denial of climate change as a factor in these unprecedented fires. But it isn't a leadership that engenders any kind of believability. They feel completely dishonest. And so, where is the integrity piece that we just talked about in terms of leadership? Where is that? So that would mean power is the agency, force is the agency. And as we shift to the hard right, really it is force that they're talking about, not collaboration, not agreement in terms of how this is going to be engineered. And if you oppose that idea, which is this, really, if we were to talk about it in a spectrum of fascism on one end and socialism on the other end, I dare not use the word communism on the one end. If, in understanding the nature of the human condition, a life filled with meaning was what was important, and a life where a very small segment of the population has a lot of stuff and everybody else doesn't have enough. Which model would you prefer? I'm solidly on the side of everybody being provided with enough resource so that everybody can pursue the things that are meaningful to them. And so that as they live this, as Mary Oliver said, this one wild and precious life that everybody has, that it's rich with meaning, not unprecedented amounts of stuff. But I don't get that much pleasure out of stuff, so I don't. It doesn't motivate me particularly. But in order to pursue primary exploration, of course, time is one of the things that you need to have, but also the support for the time so that you have the ability to pursue your interests and what you derive meaning from. And because everybody's meaning deck is different, everybody's search for meaning and the discovery of what's meaningful is going to be different. And when we value them in a culture as some things is highly remunerative and some things not remunerative at all, it doesn't allow so much for that. We sort of channel our kids into these pursuits, less oriented around what's meaningful, more oriented around how you're going to manage the constraints of transactional business relationships. And in this country, of course, the complete gutting of the public education system has resulted in fewer and fewer opportunities for most people, which means that they're subject to these work relationships really that are not substantially meaningful, of course, and in a lot of cases not even supportive of a basic life, which I think is wrong and immoral. And that's what I find mainly when I examine this, the collapse of an ethical society into one that's oriented around, well, really inequality. The thing about inequality is if you have even a sort of novel, tangential understanding of history is the thing that leads to the collapse of civilization over and over and over again. It's ridiculous how obvious it is that the stewards of our society should really take that on as an idea and prevent it from happening. And we did make quite a lot of progress until really the beginning was Reagan, but and Carter, who just recently died, of course, was an ethical and moral man who was undone by the, the corrupt. How do you manage in a world like this where there is so much corruption is the question. And I think that the hard part is um, not to just withdraw from it because it's so impossible, but to keep at it. That would be resilience. When you look at the attachment frame, because secure people learn to explore, they also learn resilience, and all along they're encouraged to explore, and if it's done well, and as they're as children, as your abilities increase, and the goals are moved out so that they're harder to get, but they still fall within the reach of the child. This is where that resilience comes from. This is where the confidence comes from. It's harder. I know it's harder. It keeps getting harder, but I can keep reaching the goal. And where there's no adjustment for that, the resilience doesn't arrive. And when the goal posts are moved beyond what the child can actually do, and the ensuing failure of not being able to reach it, not so much because there's no capability, but because the goal is harder than what the development of the child is, then that is collapses the confidence, collapses the resilience. So what you have in that small group of secure people, the resilience and the confidence to risk for meaning, and in dismissing people, of course, because uh, the rejection is so reliable, the failure of the caregiver to meet the attention and need of the child over and over again, to the point that the child abandons attempting to get it, they move much more into the secondary exploration of power and status as the way that they operate, and they're suppressing of their emotional system, so they're not empathetic, and they keep the authentic experience completely private, so they don't really communicate very well, and there's a lot of filtering of what experience is, so there's not much in the way of self-awareness either. And they learn in childhood to generate an idealized version of everything, because that's the thing that gets them what they want. It's the basis of transactional relationships. In the childhood of a dismissing person, I present the world in the way that you need me to present the world, and then you give me what I want. Also moves away from that sense of honesty. Because there's an awareness that it's not honest. There's an awareness that it's not real. But there's also an awareness that this is how you get what you want. And so it works perfectly well, particularly at the higher levels, that whole strategy. But the willingness to explore what's actually meaningful, which would divert a lot of that energy and resource, doesn't happen so much because it's the experience, the risk of rejection and the plunging into the terrible sadness is too much. People who grow up to be preoccupied don't explore very well. So they're really oriented around hitching their wagon to somebody else's exploration. I think that's why the upper level is often quite dismissing, but the next supporting level is more often preoccupied because they don't find the thing to do. They do the thing that somebody else is doing as a way of making the other person dependent on them, so they can't be abandoned. All of this is, at the core of all of this is our abandonment, our survival. So that preoccupied people are not particularly resilient in exploring. They mostly have to learn how to explore later in life. And without that lesson of most of the time, exploration not leading to anything, 2 or 3 forays, and already the resilience is failing. And disorganized people just aren't reliable enough to show up to really get much in the way of advancement. One of the things about business and is the reliability piece. In employment, the reliability piece. You show up when you say you're going to show up, and if you can't do that, you don't actually get very remunerative positions. So you end up sort of at the in the roles where whether you show up or not isn't so important. So when we move in and begin to participate in the culture of the business where we're working, is there any space to affect the nature of the culture? This would be the question. And could you then begin to understand what changes would be of benefit to you and then maybe your coworkers, and how would you then come about attempting to make those cultural changes? You may recall that there's a lot of strikes going on with Starbucks, people unionizing in those positions and attempting to negotiate in good faith. You may recall the former CEO of Starbucks saying that, I'm paraphrasing, and maybe even wildly, um, that he was completely offended that they would think that they would need to unionize because he provided such a good work environment for them.
You gave him free coffee.
uh, and how different those perspectives can be, right? How do you balance unlimited power by collaborating and coalescing so that you can meet it? Why would they want to unionize? I've given them such a great working environment. um, so what shall we do? I think that the for those of us who think of the human condition and understand it as uh, this very short amount of time to orient yourself toward the things that matter to you, that have meaning to you, and then the discovery of who you are, and in that pursuit of meaning is actually the purpose of this life. Um, find the overwhelming pressure on the other side, particularly as we go down this direction. I think that we have for 50 years disadvantaged poor people, disadvantaged working people, disadvantaged middle class people, and over and over again in pursuing every legitimate avenue to have these conditions addressed, and every legitimate avenue failing to address them have resulted in a deep anger, a bitterness about the state of things. And if the system will not work, then at least you can be in as much pain as I am in. And so that's how I really see what's happening here. The system has failed, and we have exhausted every legitimate avenue to have it address our needs, and it has not addressed them. and we're in pain, and now you're going to feel that pain. I think that's where we're at. I think that there's also a belief that it can't get worse, but I've never underestimated how bad it can get. And I think it can get way worse than it is now. Uh, so we cannot disengage. We have to engage with more effort. So that's where I think we're at. And can we do this in a way that maintains epistemic trust, that you can tell the truth and that you do mean to be helpful, and that can you then listen and respond in a kind way? We have right speech in Buddhism. Is it true? Is it timely? Is it helpful? Is it kind? You can respond to anything with that. Anger, of course, is this force that just burns everything. And the problem with the time that we live in is, long after you've been consumed by your own anger and you can't really participate anymore, we still have to be resisting. And how are you going to do that? So the engine for resistance really needs to be kindness and steadfastness, I would think. All right. As Tyson would say, enough of my socialist rant. Let's meditate. Let's do some heart practice, some loving kindness for self. I think that's in order. So go ahead and settle into your meditation posture. We'll start with a little bit of loving kindness for an easy person and then go into meditation for self. Okay, let go of the meditation. How's that? Good. So Saturday is the third day of the level 1 that's currently going on, and then we're starting level 2 in February. I think we're going to do an addiction workshop this month, and anyway, that's what's coming up. It should be on the website. We're starting a monthly gathering called Kaleidoscope, which is a class. Well, it's just a meeting and Q&A, some practice for people that have been through the different courses that we offer that would like to stay in touch with the community. So that's also on the website. So the fourth Friday of the month, we're going to meet for an hour and a half on an ongoing basis, and the first one is coming up in a couple of weeks, I think. So take a look at that. Just a conversation about people's practice, and I will prepare something in case people just want to hear something else. And then we'll have a little period of practice. Take a look at that. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you're resourced and you can make a donation, you will. There's a link on the website to do that. Any amount is helpful. It's helped support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. Really appreciate your practice, and I will see you soon somewhere on the path. Bye.